can millennials repair their balance sheet, or is this going to be the generation that fails to build wealth into retirement?
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, we dug deep into this topic, guys.
Yeah.
If you take a look at baby boomers, Gen Zs, Gen X, or millennials, let's say, there's anywhere from a 15 to 20 year difference between them, let's say. And so I went back and looked at the generation before, of course, which is Gen X. Mm-hmm. And the average price of a home was $221 15 years ago.
Right.
$221. And the interest rate was 5%. So to put things in perspective, even if, adjusted for inflation, their savings or their, whatever they have in the bank was the same, let's say. Because believe it or not, if you take a look, it's not that much different. The savings rates and things like that from generation to generation to generation are kind of consistent. I mean, they're off a little bit. What's really off is the price of a home.
Well, right. And even though millennials, right now, millennials are in their prime work years, right? And at this point, you're supposed to have a home, you're supposed to have ample savings in your retirement. You're kind of getting ready for that next phase, right? And a lot of millennials right now are still struggling paycheck to paycheck just to get by.
So millennials are years 30 to 43 right now, as of today in 2024. So born between 1981 and 1996. And so that's specifically that what for many of you, you might really understand that I think there was a point where the average time somebody bought a home was at 35 years old. And that, I know that can be different in different states and, different places. Of course, if you live in New York, it's probably longer. If you live in the Midwest, it's probably shorter. But the point is that's the average. What you guys may or may not realize is that one of the things that when you buy a home that you're doing is you're actually hedging inflation. Mm-hmm. So you're actually taking money out of rent. I'm in the rental business. You're parking it into a fixed asset, and that fixed asset is growing with you. So you're actually riding inflation, which is exactly the whole point of this channel. And so what we're saying here is it might not be showing up now, but it's going to really be showing up in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. And Jerry, if you can pull that chart. So this is an interesting chart, because this is, millennial versus boomers. And the two things I think really stand out, the net worth really doesn't stand out that much. It's not that different. But I think that the year of college, if you see how much increase that millennials have taken on in debt compared to boomers, and then also the price of a home. And I do believe those two things are interrelated in that because millennials are spending so much and have so much debt towards college, they can't afford to buy a home.
That's a good, keep this up real quick, Jerry. So I think that's a really good point. You and I obviously have been through college and I had student debt and mine was at 3% and it was minimal. It was, I used it. It was great. I paid it off. I remember paying it off, but I know we have lots of friends that are doctors and, have spent a lot of money in college and they're getting waxed. They can't afford a home because their payment on their student debt is so high. And then I just read an article last week about people that go to school for like, not to bang on this, but like a sociology degree, let's say, or something that where your salary is going to be much less than $100,000. It just doesn't make sense. Is college worth it at that level? I mean, I hate to even say it because obviously I'm all about education, but it's getting really expensive. And one of the things that we've seen is that college has gotten out of control. The costs of what colleges are charging and, and these kids they don't really understand the bigger picture when they're getting into this kind of debt.
Right. And they don't understand the picture and they don't understand that this could limit them from maybe taking on the opportunity to buy a home. And it comes to question, whether the college is going to still look the same, in 10 years.
Yeah, think about it. Like, who would ever thought that a doctor couldn't afford a home? Like,
Right.
really? Like, that just blows my mind. The fact that, and that is a credible profession. Obviously, it takes. Last I heard was like what 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to get through all the different kinds of schooling. Most people don't have the cash. Some people have rich parents or whatever, but the point is, most people don't have the cash to go through something like that, and so they were racking it up with the intent, of course, of paying it off. The problem is that debt itself becomes a burden on being able to buy a home.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember too, millennials had a tough generation. So I'm a millennial, and right when you graduate, you run right into the Great Depression, or Great Recession, I should say, of '08. And you aren't able to get that traction. Like, I know when I graduated, I was a teacher, and then when I didn't want to teach anymore after a couple years, it was 2008, and I had to go back to bartending for years because nobody was hiring. You couldn't get a job.
But I also remember you didn't fully understand money. Like,
no.
Remember that? I think that's the biggest issue. Is I remember you saying that you're going to be a teacher, and you obviously became a teacher. You went into the system, and what were you making again? I can't remember.
Like 28, I think, and then my next school was like 32.
Okay, so that's
bad.
tough.
But I didn't, I'm an older millennial, so I didn't pay for school what the kids are paying now or what the younger millennials paid for school. I think my in-state tuition might have been, all said and done, like $60,000 for 4 years or something.
Okay,
so it was a lot better.
That's very good.
But it quickly escalated after I graduated. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big ones is obviously the cost of education is keeping people out of it. The other thing is homes themselves have gone up. So we can blame the debt, and it needs to be blamed for sure. But one of the things I think that you pointed out to me was that you didn't quite understand because that $32,000 was gross.
Yeah, it was bad.
That was your gross pay.
It was bad. It was not a lot of money.
I mean, think about what you were bringing home.
It was so bad. I realized that I was making more money bartending in college 3 days a week than I was making teaching, which I didn't anticipate when they said, you'll make 30-some thousand a year. Because when you're young, you just don't always do the math.
Yeah, and
Taxes
so I think that's happening. And let's just say, though, the homes back 15 years ago, the average price of a home was $221. So now it's $431. So it's $200,000 more, let's say, and interest rates are higher. I mean, we all know what's going on with interest rates, and I think they were 5% back then, but now they're, let's say, 6, maybe in the high 5s or in the low 6s. So it's not just an interest rate problem. It's the price. The price has gone up $200,000 in 15 years. So
well, and I also want to point out that Ivan just said this past week I finished applying for my son's student loans, and they went 9.5%, and the other plan payment was at 11%.
That's unbelievable.
That's
hard money for a school.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Mine was 3%.
Mine was low. It was like
I remember mine was 3%. And my payment was low too as a result of that. As you imagine, if it's 10%, I didn't realize it was that much. I guess so the point is, though, what's the ripple effect? Well, what these millennials, they're going to whether you choose to agree or not, the reality is that a $430,000 home today, with inflation, the way we look, way it's going to be trending, it's going to be $600,000 before you know it. Period. Right. Just like it was $221 before you know it. My mom. I mean, I always talk about my mom on this channel, but my mom paid $15,000 for the house, and she still owns it.
And how much is it worth today?
$700 and change.
Now she's in her 90s.
My mom. God bless her. But that was a big deal for them. My dad was in construction. My mom was a hairdresser, and that's my mom's retirement. She didn't make a lot. She did fine. I'm blessed. But the point was, if you take a look at their entire net worth, that's what it is, and that's what it is for most people, and that's the point.
But what's interesting, though, is because millennials aren't investing in houses because they can't necessarily afford to, they are investing in other things. So that's kind of where you're starting to see, crypto rising. You're starting to see a lot of crowdfunding, which is when they take small deposits from a bunch of people and, into a bigger investment. The stock market, Robinhood through the stock market, they're investing. And then they're doing, their 401k.
Yeah, I know. I just, it's not going to move the needle like real estate. One of the things, you're still going to have a rent payment. And it's interesting, obviously I'm in the rent business, but rent is going to continue to go up, guys. For the next 18 months, it's going to be, let's say, flat because of the amount of units that are hitting. But after that, it's going to go up, no matter who's in office. I mean, it's already being talked about. We watched the Kamala Harris talk the other day.
Yep.
Everyone's talking about homeownership, affordability. And I think that's going to be a real problem. I read an article last week. Listen to this one. The woman had 2 kids, and she was looking for a 2-bedroom, and it was $2,700 for a 2-bedroom. And she wanted a 3, but she was, obviously trying to compromise and have a 2. She ended up renting a hotel.
Yeah.
A hotel for $2,200 a month.
Right.
A long-term hotel. And that's when you're at that point. What's happening is you're not building wealth. And so the point is this: if you're going to spend $2,200 a month, shouldn't you spend it on yourself? Because when you pay your mortgage, you're paying your home down. That's the point. So you're not only getting the inflation benefits from the cost of the house going up, but you're also paying down your mortgage. That is the whole point. So the mortgage is going down, the cost of the home is going up, and that's how you're building equity. That's what we're talking about here, and that's what a lot of people are going to miss out on.
Well, and also the fixed rate in general, because even if you make money through crypto or you make money through your 401k, I was reading,
taxed.
Right. And I was reading, these financial planners are trying to tell people, okay, if you're going to retire, you need to save 10% of your income to then have enough to retire and blah, 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 blah. But the problem is that they don't know what the inflation is going to be. So they can't actually tell you how much is the right number that you're going to need to retire. Because if there was no inflation and you're saving 10% of your income and you have Social Security, you can kind of do some general math on the lifestyle you want and et cetera. But without knowing the inflation and you have rent payments, you just can't calculate how much you're going to need.
One other thing, I just want to, you guys, I've told the story before, but I was looking at insurance, like we all have life insurance, let's say. My dad bought a life insurance policy. It was $10,000. And I remember as a kid, he would say, oh, I got your mom covered. I got your mom covered. I got a $10,000 insurance policy. So when he passed away, of course, you start looking at all this stuff, and it was $10,000. And it essentially just almost paid for, his service. That's basically it. So the $10,000 was $10,000. The point is it didn't move with inflation. That's the point. So these financial products, a lot of times that you guys are choosing, these things that you're investing in, you need to ask that question. Does this move with inflation? You got to know based on the last 10 years, the last 20 years, and what's going to be different. Inflation is still going to be here. Even the Fed target is 2%. Now, they're not there. They're getting closer, but it's been significantly higher, let's say. You are going to be in an inflationary period over the next 10 to 20 years. That is a fact. So whether it's 3% or 4%, let's say on the average, every 10 years, that's 30 to 40%. So if you're buying something today that's worth $10,000 and it deflates by 30 to 40%, that's what it's going to be. And so the point here is you want to be in something that's inflation adjusted. That is the point. And if for you, if that's turning your money into crypto or if it's giving it to a financial planner or a wealth manager or something, then that's fine. But that should be the question you should be asking is is this $1 going to grow by more than inflation? Because if not, you're just treading water.
Right. Yeah, you can't just put it in a bank account and hope for the best, because that's not going to work out.
By the way, this generation, it's not any smarter or any less smart than the last one. The difference is that the last one, most of their wealth is in their homes. That's actually the entire point.
And they don't have the debt.
Correct. They don't have the debt, but they also, and part of the reason that people are being squeezed right now, I read this morning in preparing for this that 40% are struggling with expenses. 40% of the U.S., not just millennials, are struggling with expenses, and 35% are actually working extra jobs just to try to make ends meet. So that's where we are. We've been here before. The point is that if you can park your money in some kind of a hard asset and pay it down instead of paying rent, the landlords, you're going to be better off. And that is the point here, because you're going to grow your own equity. At some point, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, your house is going to be paid off. And that is actually going to be probably the majority of your net worth, just like it's been for the last 50 years.
So even, for these millennials, because, the question is, right, like, what can you do about it, right? You're a millennial, you're in this position, what can you do? And we're telling you to get into a hard asset like a home. So if you were a millennial and you're looking to buy, would you be worried that the market could go down, or would you just get in?
Yeah, I see that. Again, a home is not a stock. You got to look at the bigger picture. Yes, the answer is yes. Am I concerned that my home's going to go down? Of course. But it's my home. Like, it's not rent. And I'm paying it off, and does it go down? Yes, but it could also go up. It can go down, it can go up, it can go down,
you can
it can
refinance.
Go up. Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. The point is that you're actually investing in yourself. You're investing in something that you own personally. Right now, you're just you're turning most people are just turning their money over into these financial products that they don't fully understand. Nobody can tell me what crypto or Bitcoin or the stock market's going to be doing. Nobody can tell me what real estate's going to be doing. But there's one thing I can tell you is if you buy a home at 400 and you put a debt on it and you start paying it down, you're in control of that. You're going to be paying something. You're going to be paying rent. You're going to be paying a mortgage. You're going to be paying that. So, and then if you want to move, throw a renter in there, and have the renter pay it off. I mean, that is the model.
Well, and I think it's important to note, that FHA loans, a lot of times you guys only need 5% down. I think a lot of times people think they need 20% down in order to buy a home, and you don't. And FHA loans have been really hard the last few years because it's such a hot market and it's a pain in the butt loan because it takes longer and sellers don't love it. But now that the market has turned and homes are sitting, it's a great time to be able to buy a home with a FHA loan.
Yeah, but you got to get rid of your debt bomb. Most of you have a huge debt bomb. It could be student loans, it could be credit cards.
Dave Ramsey calls that a debt snowball.
I
know you love Dave Ramsey.
Oh, he's got a point. I mean, I don't disagree with everything he said, but the one when he said he'd get $1 billion and he wouldn't take it, that one at 0%, that one about, I don't know. Anyway, but the point is, if you don't understand how to manage money, then you should follow his strategy because he basically is saying don't have any debt. Pay off your debt. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. You actually subscribe to a little bit of that.
I do. I don't know if I'm a Dave Ramsey fan, but I do a lot of what he says to do.
You own a lot of real estate for Inkler.
Yep.
And, there's nothing wrong with that. And that is kind of the point. The point is to get in with leverage and then pay off the leverage.
Right.
And my sister did that. And you guys, I talked about her a lot. And I think she had 25 or 27 rentals at some point. And her tenants were paying them off. And she was a bookkeeper. She didn't even go to college.
Right.
And you can do it. I'm telling you, guys you can do it. It might be you might have to give up on that Gucci purse or whatever it is. Some of these other kinds of
Starbucks coffees.
Yeah, whatever. That's I don't know, but that stuff does add up.
Yeah, it's definitely the direction you guys want to go. In order to really have wealth, you're going to have to own a home in order to. So, if you're sitting there and you're not making a lot of money, just you need to figure it out. Garrett was actually saying you only need 3.5% down for an FHA. Just figure it out. You can save up the money. You can be a homeowner. You got to get some of your debt paid down, but you can do that too.
Look at some of these strategies, house hack. The whole thing doesn't have to land on you. We have a young man that we know that bought a 4-bedroom house, and he lives in one of them, and he rented out the other 3 to his buddies, and he lives free and clear. So, and he's the one on the mortgage, and they're paying it off. So, and he has no problem. He's just got some roommates. He's in his 20s. It's an inconvenience for him, but not really, because he likes having roommates. That's probably not ideal if you have a family and all that. But the point is that there are lots of ways to figure this out.
So before we hop into our questions, I want to talk about Limitless. We have that coming up in 2 weeks from now, August 29th through the 34th in Gaylord.
31st.
Oh, yeah, 31st.
Yeah, 31st.
In Gaylord, Texas.
That's a long month, 34.
But anyways, we have some great speakers. And if you guys use code KEN10, you can get 10% off.
Yeah, we're going to be there next week, guys. It's going to be fun. We got 50 speakers. Obviously, we announced we got RFK Jr. coming. That's going to be fun. We got him and Robert Kiyosaki. I'm going to moderate. Talk about the middle class. How do we empower the middle class? Because as you guys know, this is a great topic. This is exactly what's happening. There's a big gap between rich and poor. And, healthy economies have healthy middle classes.
Yep.
And so that should be an interesting combo.
Yep. So let's hop into our questions. Those listening on YouTube, make sure you ask. I'll pull a couple. Mark is asking, have you seen a downturn in banks lending on apartments? And if so, what are the alternatives?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Guys, I don't know if you realize one of the panels we've got at Limitless is about this. There's a pullback. Lenders are feeling the pain, not in every way. So, if you look at single family, you're not going to see it because there's not a massive default like there was in 08, 9, 10. But with office buildings and with many multifamily, as an example, you're starting to see a lot of stress. Yes, the answer is yes. And so why would that be? Because a lot of those loans were maturing. And so if you owned something, let's say, and you were locked in at 3%, now you're going to be in the 6s. So now all of a sudden, you can't make those numbers work. And so, or maybe you were on a floating loan. So what that means is that your rate floats with the market. So your payment went up from the time that you bought it. And so now you're out of cash. So all of those things are happening kind of behind the scenes. We're seeing with agencies, which is Freddie and Fannie, in the 50s loan to value. Mm-hmm. So, that's what we're seeing. And so, yes, you're starting to see alternative companies pop up, like life companies and pension companies are starting to offer these kinds of products because it is a little bit of a window for people that are trying to place money. Mm-hmm. But again, it all goes down to the underwriting and the person that's actually doing the deal. But there's no question that many loans are toxic. This is kind of a weird year because you're starting to see defaults. People are running out of cash. The loan covenants themselves are in jeopardy. So in other words, there's what's called debt service coverage, which means that you have to have significantly more coming in than in the net operating income than in the debt, and so people are starting to take a look at the cash. They're starting to look at the debt service coverages. They're starting to look at those kinds of things, and they're going back to these operators and these syndicators, and they're asking for more money. And rate caps are still a thing too. So let's don't forget how fast rates went up in the last couple of years. And they're certainly not going to come down at that rate. So even if they do come down in September, half a point, quarter point, it's not going to be that meaningful. It certainly will help. But it's not going to be that meaningful because they went up so fast. So yes, right now is an interesting time because but you got to be careful. It all boils down to math. We just saw during our Q&A with our in the beginning of this live that but student loans are 9-10%.
Right.
So if you got student loans at 9 or 10%, you can imagine what apartment or commercial or retail or industrial debt is. It's expensive. So again, the math has to pay it off. The math of the actual asset itself needs to pay it off. So I expect it to be worse.
So Mike's asking, I'm young and feel unable to buy a home. What are other ways for me to build wealth?
Yeah, I think I wish I had a magic bullet for you, Mike. But for me, I think you got to look at everything. There's nothing wrong with looking at crypto. There's nothing wrong with looking at oil and gas. There's nothing wrong with looking at gold and silver. I think last I looked, what is it, silver in the 30s, something like that. Gold is at an all-time high, I think 2,500 or something. It just peaked. So I don't know whether that's going to continue to go up or down. But those are all ways that you can get in really easily. I started with just buying ounces of gold and ounces of silver, and just started buying these little affordable houses. Let's kind of like what Danille does. Danille just started. I think your first one was like 190 or something.
160.
160, yeah. And so affordable housing is going to be a real big thing, and that's going to be a thing moving forward. So those are not going to go away, guys. Everybody's going to need. If it's on a presidential, if they're mentioning it now, affordability. They're starting to come out a lot more. I can assure you, it's on everyone's radar at this moment.
So Colin from YouTube's asking, are condos a good investment if I can't afford a home?
They can be, but you got to be careful. There's a bunch of problems with condos. The one thing is the HOA. Of course, we all love HOAs. So, but if you buy into a condominium project that has deferred maintenance, let's say exterior paint, roofs, parking lot, that kind of stuff, those costs are actually yours. They're partially yours. Let's say there's 100 units in this condo project, and all that work's $100,000. That's a $1,000 to you that you'll have to pay into some bigger fund, usually called a replacement reserve. So that's one of the big things. You oftentimes have a lot of restrictions around whether you can rent them short-term, long-term, because the HOAs don't really like those because they want homeowners. So there are some pros and cons to it. I think in a lot of cases it can be very much a pro, but in some cases it can be a con. And I think that generally the reason why they're less is because they're smaller. You're talking about these are smaller units. You got 800,000-900,000 square foot type units. You're not going to find it in a house. So you should probably look at the square footage. Also, you are restricted a little bit, obviously, with yards and families and things like that. A lot of times they don't like to live in those kinds of properties, but not always. So, there's pros and cons to both. I mean,
I like my condo. I mean, I have a couple condos, and they don't cash flow as well as the single family homes, but they are also cheaper than the single family homes. So I like them. They're good investments, but you just got to be careful on the HOA. You don't want one that's underwater, and you want to make sure that it's renter friendly and that,
the other thing
they're always a pain in the butt, but my houses have HOAs as well.
The other thing, Danille's in a condo project. There's like 300.
Yes.
There's like 300 of them.
Yeah.
So
both.
Let's just guess. Let's say there's 152 bedrooms. Okay, which is probably pretty close. So if you have a lot of investors there, you're going to have a marketplace that kind of sets the rent. Again, but if you're not renting, if you're just buying, it might be fine. But if you ever decide to rent it, you're going to be subjected to that market. So if somebody rents one for $1,500, that's probably about where you're going to have to rent yours. If somebody, the average rent's $2,000, it'll be a little different. In a home, you have a little more flexibility, and something that's, let's say, decentralized, you're going to have a little more flexibility.
Yeah. It's definitely better to get the bigger, rental projects. I have one of my townhomes is in a HOA with like 15 people, and it's terrible because they make rules and there's 15 of them and they kind of collude. When you have 100 and some people, it's a lot better, and the expenses are allocated between 100 and some people.
Yeah, think about that. She's got an HOA with 15 people. Could you imagine that?
It's terrible. So, I basically am like, and I'm one of the only rentals, so it's basically like everyone hates me. Even though my tenant's great.
And there's only one parking space, right?
Yeah, and I'm not allowed to park in the road, even though I'm the only one with a 1-car garage. And there's 3 empty parking spaces but next to the pool that are never occupied, but you're not allowed to use those either overnight. So it's just this whole thing. So I'm in the works of settling that right now.
So anyway, it's not all bad, but at the same token,
you don't want to be in a small HOA. I'm telling you, it's much more of a pain in the butt than a large one. To be continued on that story. But so Mark's also asking, other people's money, what percentage do you pay if you want to buy them out if they invest with you?
It's a more complicated. So OPM is other people's money, guys. So that could be equity, it could be debt. OPM could be all debt. So again, it's the price of whatever the OPM is. So once you get money from someone, you obviously owe them some kind of a rate on that money. So in the form of debt, it's, let's say, 6%. Typically equity is a little bit higher. However, that's what they're getting each and every month, let's say, or each and every year, I should say. But the question is if you're trying to buy out a partner, then it becomes a more complicated issue, because then you got to figure out what's that real estate worth, what's that business worth. That's what they're going to want. They're going to want their percentage of ownership. So it really has less to do with OPM on a buyout than their percentage of ownership. So typically, just to give you an example, when we raise money through OPM, let's say somebody has 5% of a deal. That's actually what they're getting. They're getting 5% of whatever that deal's worth. So if the deal's worth $100,000, they get $5,000 for that 5%, regardless of what the actual rate, how much money they put in or whatever. So it really boils down to the ownership. Now, of course, you're negotiating both, because you might be a low buyout and they might be making a lot of money on the rate of the money. So they might say, nope, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Or they might not be getting any kind of return, and they might want to be bought out for anything. But at the end of the day, it's all negotiable. But that's typically, if I were in a deal like that, I would look at my percentage of ownership. I would figure out what the value was, and then I would want to be bought out from that point.
So what are your thoughts about being on an HOA board? Because that's the discussion going on in the chat right now. Is that one of the members has...
I've been on many of them.
What are your thoughts about it? See, that's my thought. See, I would love to be on one because I would want to like change the board, but I feel like it would just be me against the board, and I would be sitting there.
Good luck. No. Like, okay, first of all, I should do a movie about this. I'm telling you.
A whole movie?
A whole movie. Like, like a parody. Like, I would tell you, like, so I've built condo projects, and then I actually was the board, and then I hired people and got homeowners to be on the board, and then I transitioned myself off the board. I have a lot of experience. I would tell you, my experience is this. Typically, the people that are on a board are... They're folks that have never had any kind of power before, and now they have a little bit, and they start going after all the homeowners, like for the landscaping and for the color of their house or the roof issues. Or remember you had like something that hadn't been painted on yours, that had never been painted from the time it was built. They start walking around with their clipboards, man, I tell you what, the boards now, not all of them are like that. I've been on boards that are super cool, but my experience is, but then they turn over a lot, and so it's frustrating, man. I let me tell you what I'd rather do: go to the dentist. I would. Like, boards are tough.
Yeah. So Well, we'll leave it on that note, and we'll see you guys next week, and we hope we'll see you at Limitless.
See you guys soon.